Keith.
Hi, Carrie.
How's it going?
It's going really well.
Yeah, so today we're just going to be talking about art and activism and the One Voice poem and kind of how that all came to be.
Sounds like a great topic. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so why don't you just, hear what you do at New Roots and start from there, and then maybe talk a little bit about the art that you do outside of your job at New Roots.
Sure. So with New Roots Institute, I'm a lead educator, and part of my job is I go into classrooms and I have these conversations with students that kind of peel back the layers of what does our food system truly look like and where are these impacts that we've not truly talked about openly as a society, and why, and looking at those and looking at, is there a better path forward and how can we brainstorm together and look for a better path forward. And then in addition to that, we have a leadership program that allows students to continue on, to be part of the movement and factory farming, not just to hear something and say, hey, what can I do about it, but to take those skills outside of the classroom and training and connection with experts and time and discussion groups, and really build on their own thoughts and start working on implementing campaigns to try to change some of the options. Because part of all of that is you've got to have the possibility for the change that you want to see. And so, getting more options on their cafeteria, their dining hall, or even giving lessons like I do, like fellows that would move forward. So you could go from being in one of my lessons to giving one of my lessons, which is a really cool transition.
It's a nice full circle moment for the students.
Yeah.
So let's hear more about your art.
So I've been writing for a number of years, and it honestly started with, I've written to some extent beyond that, but most of my writing started with social media, with Facebook, and you would post something, especially as someone who was very adamant about changes I wanted to see in the world, and you get pushback because change is always uncomfortable. And people come back like, oh, what about this and what about this? And I found myself like I would write answers and it would take time, and then I would get the same question again the next week or the next month, and I'm just like, I need to start saving these so I can save myself some time. So I'm not constantly rewriting these. And at some point in time, for tabling events, I was looking at, could I bring some of these writings together? And I started, printing them out and putting them on the table because I saw what I liked. I thought really spoke to the common questions that were hitting me as an activist of, okay, but this, but about protein or, all these other things that always pop up. Of like, the animals will take over the world if you slow down slaughter rates. And I'm like, well, this is not how the system works. And so I started realizing I had enough of those little essays, little short blurbs built up, and eventually decided to make that into a book, to like clean that up and look into that, and put out my first book with that.
What was the title of that book?
That one was called What If the Shoe Were on the Other Hoof? So taking ourselves, and if you play these scenarios, does the milking of cows play out the same if it's the milking of humans? Does the if this is a dog instead of a pig we're talking about, does that change our relationship with how we would see this as ethical or unethical, or what things we would allow to be done to them? And for a lot of us it does, but really letting people sit in those thoughts. And then somewhere shortly after, there were 2 poems in the first book, and then shortly after that, I started going to more poetry events in my area and open mics, and started getting involved in the poetry community. And as you hear that, as you're exposed to all these other cool local poets, more of my work started coming out as poetry. So instead of what I was writing as essay, started now coming out of me as poetry, and that's been what I write most of. And this response to everything, to a world that feels oftentimes excessively cruel in many ways, in the factory farming industry and well beyond, and the hopes for a better world. So I've told people, like, I write poetry so I don't stand outside my back door screaming. It feels like this productive release of how do you let all these emotions come in and then still deal with them in a way that's productive to you, that allows you to use your voice and use your emotions, and put that back out there. Like, even if no one read it, like, it was valuable to me that I formed that into that art for me. But then when other people do read it, then it has the chance to have impact beyond there.
Yeah. So like really what I'm hearing are like these 2 threads of, you're using the writing in your activism as a way to communicate about the issues, but also as like catharsis for yourself. But in that builds that space for other people to read those poems and like feel that connection, either as another activist feeling the same catharsis, or as a person who's new to the topic and like, oh wow, like I can see the emotional impact of this. It's not just the facts.
Yeah. Absolutely, and you stated that for me really well. How how does that? How does that sum up for me? It's all of that, and it gets to be all of that at the same time. Like my catharsis is also activism at the same time. And as you mentioned, I love that you pointed that out. Is that's also motivation or understanding, at least for another activist out there who's like sometimes we each form different responses, and some of us do that in poetry or in art or whatever comes out. But allowing that you can read someone else's, or you can see somebody else's painting, they painted, and you can feel the expressions inside there that speak to you, that reach to you, and that also helps alleviate some of that too, some of that pressure of the standing up against a world that stands back in huge force against you.
Mm-hmm. Standing up against a world that stands back in huge force against you. It's a nice thing to say, Keith.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, part of this for me, I wanted to talk to you because I also make art.
Yes.
And do activism through that. And so, for those of you at home, I am our senior advancement manager at New Roots Institute. So I really do all the communications and fundraising and strategy for that. And so for me, if I'm honest, more of my poetry is about, being in love or the world around me. I do have some activist poems that come out from time to time, and we'll share a couple of those in a little bit.
That sounds great.
But I think more of my activism and art has come around photography. Mm-hmm. So when I lived in Orlando, Florida, after the Pulse tragedy, I did an art and storytelling project where I took portraits of people who had Pulse tattoos in front of murals that popped up around Orlando, and I interviewed them and did like oral histories. And so that was a series that was in my campus art gallery. It's been in the Orlando History Center, Orange County History Center, and Orlando Public Library. And so that was just like a really powerful way to take a portrait of like someone who lived through that event or someone who lost friends at that event. But this very like bold expression of like I'm reclaiming that because I put this art on my body now. So it was like a very meta kind of look at the way we use art to heal. And I see in the movement, I see like these really stunning, like there's so much stunning photojournalism that's happening, and really people that are like doing that on the ground work to document and storytell around the truth of what's actually happening.
Yeah. And I know you're the one asking the questions, but now I want to ask you more about that. Okay, absolutely. So when you did this project after the Pulse tragedy with the tattoos and the photos behind them, and there's got to be power to you as the artist. Like you got things out of that. I would imagine very clearly. But also you have like we were talking about. You have that spread of awareness for others who need more awareness of what truly is happening out there, and needing more human connection to elements that we deal with. That for some people, if it's just distant, is a lot different than when you can connect it to the personal story, as well as survivors and mourners finding that power in that too. I don't know how much. What kind of feedback did you get back on your project?
Oh, I mean, I'm still connected with most of those people.
Wow.
Yeah.
The people you took photos of.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say I think almost all of them expressed to me either in the moment or after like how powerful it was to be able to tell their story, to have it documented, to feel part of something bigger, and then just like then having those people come to the show and like seeing their portrait on the wall and like taking pictures with their families with their portrait. It was just really beautiful. And I do think that it's really that like humanizing element, and also kind of that concept of like within the very personal you find the universal, right? So like even though you're telling a story of just one person, or like in a poem you're telling a story of just like one animal, we can all like see those bigger common themes within it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Keith.
Yes.
One voice poem happens. That's going to be a big part of what people are seeing coming out of New Roots Institute this winter. Can you talk a little bit more about how that poem came to be and kind of the process behind it?
Yeah, sure. I'm excited about that. It's the
us too.
Yeah, so the concept, of course, as anyone who tries to make change knows, you're going to hear other people saying, yeah, but you're only one person, we're not going to change anything. And sometimes that's going to come from your own head. You're going to get that self-doubt of like, oh, I'm only one person, what can I do? But of course, if you look through any social justice movement in history, any change in history, like how did you build that? You build it one person at a time. Like that's like, of course it's one person, but it's one person when compiled with a whole bunch of people. During the fellowship program we had for students over the summer, there were set hours of time to come and connect with experts and to hear seminars and things like that, and to build in your teams. And then there were elective hours where they got to choose what would speak to them. And I was asked to run one of the elective hours where we looked at poetry and activism, like how, as we've been talking about, how do you make those play together? And this concept of this one voice thing was in my mind. Like I wanted these fellows to feel that, to take it from, because I know it's there. I mean, it's for many heads, it like pops in your, my head some of the time. Like, is this, but to just feel what it feels like when you're only one voice, but you're surrounded by others who are only one voice, and you're in agreement and a common ground and things you want to build on, and how powerful that can be.
Yeah, and then those voices come together.
Yes, and so what does one voice then ultimately sound like when I'm only one voice and 40 people are saying that, or 200 people, or 2,000 people? And so I had designed the elective there's some just looking because you didn't have to have any knowledge or interest in art or poetry to come into the elective. And so we looked at some pieces that just little clips from pieces that really spoke to me, from different artists, and how you can
share
use.
a couple of those if people are into this?
Yeah, I have to look to give you exact.
But just generally some spoken word artists that you like.
Oh yeah, and spoken word artists that I like.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to think of who I use in there. Just in general, spoken word artists.
Yeah.
So like, I love a lot of different spoken artists, but Melissa May, Kyla Janae Lacey, Akeem Rollins, Roger Bell Freeman, some of those are in my Stay With Me, Patrick Roche. I'm gonna miss tons and tons of names of favorites, but they're just these amazing poets that if you start Googling them and looking into them and finding pieces that they can speak to you in many different ways. Like you mentioned, different things you would write about or I might write about, and some overlap, and some things we're going to write about, completely different topics, let alone perspectives, which we'll always have. And yeah, they're so easy to find connection and power, and spoken word is very underutilized in my mind, very underappreciated, as a lot of the arts sadly are. So I've done projects where I do this project where I collect different voices on my own, in my own poetry. I put together a project called Outdoor Voices in an Indoor World, which started during COVID, of like we're all shut down and you can't get together, you can't have these features in person, you can't listen to poets because we're all stuck at home at the beginning of COVID. And like how do I had some extra time on my hands because I also things were shut down for me too, and so like how do I use that? And so I started collecting virtually poets, different pieces, one poem each from different spoken word artists, and putting them together in this collection. And part of me, like I reached out to people like Kyla Janae Lacey, I think is one of the best poets we have in the world. And I had no personal connection at all but the poetry world is such a different scale. Like, could I have reached out to the top pop singer today and got a response? No, but could you potentially reach out to one of the top poets in the world right now and get a personalized response? Like, there's a decent chance.
Right.
And I did. So I got some of these poets, and I knew some really cool, amazing poets I wanted to start with. Like, okay, we get enough. And I expected it to kind of be there. And then I would reach out and I would get more yeses, and it became, so it's like I had these really awesome folks, but like even people I never would have expected or that I learned new about became part of that project too. And I don't remember the end of the rest of your question, which is why I paused slightly there.
Yeah, we're going to circle back
to the poem.
To the New Roots poem, the elective hour. So we were there.
Okay, so thank you.
We're there. We're at the elective hour.
We're at the elective hour.
Yeah.
So in the elective hour, we looked at some of those pieces, and we looked at just the possibility of how to use your voice in this way, of how can you take two things that might be important to you, like poetry and activism, and they can work completely on their own, or they can turn and they can meet and you can use them together, which was the basis of what we're looking at, the possibilities for that. And I gave the fellows options of 4 or 5 different breakout rooms. They could work together on a haiku, because that's an easy poem to work on.
Easy.
Yeah, I mean, easy. It's easy to feel successful and to have written
Sure.
something in a short amount of time.
You got the form.
Right. Whether or not you made a great haiku, but that wasn't the point of, you didn't need to come out of there where, like, I made this amazing piece of poetry, but just the concept, hopefully, is you came out of there understanding that I can make art. I can make poetry, even if you didn't think you could. And I've had a couple fellows reach out to me later, like, I had no interest in poetry, like, didn't think this was something that I could do, and then came to a session like this. And one of them's now taking a class on like poetry and activism at their school, which I thought was a really cool transition to like not come in with any thoughts of this is for me, and to walk out of there like, I think I might want to do more of this, enough to take a college class on it.
Let's pause and let that sink in, because I think that speaks to what our program is actually doing for these students. It's not just the poetry, some of them never heard of policy, and they come in and they're like, oh, actually this is really cool. So I do think, being relatively new to New Roots, been here less than a year, I think that's one of the pieces of our program that's so interesting and powerful, is we're giving the students and the fellows so many different avenues to explore within movement work.
Yeah, I love that. It's really powerful that there are so many movements. You can bring in somebody who, like, your interest is here, and like there's connection, there are fields for you to go into for jobs, and your connection is here, and there still are, and they can be like, there's going to be a lot of overlap of, okay, we might care a little about this, or we might have our skills here, but it's just such a wide range of how our students, of how anyone can be part of this movement.
Yeah, cool. And so one of the breakout rooms is where what we now see as the one voice poem, that's where that emerged from.
Yeah, so a couple options of that they could work on this together. They could work on this together. Then there was an independent option, like I just want time to write on my own, which is valid. If you just want to, like, I want to be in my own space and work out my head, or if you want to have that group collaboration. And so for one of them, they were going to write a piece with me, and the repetitive line was, I'm only one voice. And then we started examining, like, okay, what are some of the things behind that? What do you hear? Like, why? Both from the standpoint of the skeptical, the doubtful, the people come to you, like, what are those reasons? Like, I'm only one voice, I won't change anything. And getting the students that were with me, the fellows that were with me, to brainstorm what those ideas were. And some of them came out in poetry. My favorite line in the whole poem was written by one of the students that was in there, which is the line.
Yeah.
And so that, I'm only one voice, a tiny speck in the big world, or something like that, which I really liked, and I think Advocate wrote that in the piece, and I'm sorry if I'm miscrediting that, but I think that's who it was. And then you also, like, but what is the way, I'm only one voice, but, like, my voice matters, but there's more than one of me. And we did this, and we performed it in the piece. Like, we read it, the few of us who wrote this together, the number of fellows and myself in there, we read it back to the main group at the end of the elective. And then part of my idea was, like, I just think it would be cool to film it, and to hear it and have it the way you could read it, even just, now to other peoples who weren't able to attend that elective. And so I did, and I reached out to a number. I posted on the platform we use so that anyone had access to see, hey, if you're interested in helping with this, I'd love to have your involvement. And I got plenty of readers back for this, which was really exciting. So I got to edit together this whole concept, to hear it, to as I guess you will at some point in time here soon, or you can, of what does that look like, and how do you bring all these voices together to create that, and then start overlapping some of those voices by the end, so that you do physically verbally hear that power of these voices continuing to compound.
Yeah, I think it is, the whole poem is stunning, but for me it's really that last bit of the video where there's, like, a couple people, and there's 9 people, and then it's just exponential, and I really do think that that is what we're doing, right? That's what New Roots is doing, is we're going out and we're finding new voices to add to the movement, and we're equipping them to take their voice and teach other people, and then we have more voices, and really we're just starting, and now these roots are spreading.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's beautiful.
It is very beautiful.
Yeah. So you want to share one of your poems with me, Keith?
Sure. I was walking for a long time during COVID, and at the beginning of COVID, when you couldn't do anything else, I started just walking the street, and I was walking for miles, and you sit in your own head when you're walking by yourself, and that can be a great place for writing poetry, is as you sit in your own head.
It's Mary Oliver, right?
Yeah.
She went on her daily walk, and that's where her poems came from.
It's perfect. Yeah, it's a great place. And a lot of mine, I do from walking or driving alone or something. It's the time that I'm really sitting enough for some of those things to actually come to me. And so this line came to me of, they wanted me to stay inside their box. The idea of, this box society says this is who you are, or who you are supposed to be. And a line from what became the poem, a very short poem, but a line from me came to that. And I'm walking and just kind of expanding on that. And so this poem is called Hinges. Okay. They wanted me to stay inside their box, to color inside their lines. They wanted me to stay inside their box, easily judged, easily classified. They wanted me to stay inside their box, afraid if my box moved, their box would topple from its comfortable perch. They wanted me to stay inside their box. Their box was narrow and empty. They wanted me to stay inside their box, but there were hinges on the lid.
Ooh, Keith. Hinges on the lid.
So, and that's the line that came to me when I'm walking. It's like this idea of like you're supposed to stay in the box, and I'm like, you can like open that box and crawl the hell out.
I can get this box. Thank
Absolutely.
You,
yeah, of course.
Really beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm a little hesitant to go after that.
I've heard some of what you've written, and I'm excited to hear some more.
Yeah. So I'd say this is less of a spoken word and more of just a poem. Actually, for context, I wrote this. I got to see Alicia Garza, who's one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, and I saw her speak at a campus where I was working. Nice. And I got she did a talk for the library beforehand, and then she did a public talk, and this is coming from a line of something she said when she was talking about movement work and social justice. So the title is Unearth All the Things We Learned About Each Other That Are Lies.
Ooh, all right, that's a great start already.
Yeah. Look at all the tributaries of how we got here. We were a line, a branch, a tree, a spider web. Caught up between reminders, no one requires us to land. We could hang by any of these hands. Hold some steady thread back to the source, sticking to our hoarse voices, carrying every name that came before. It takes all sorts of sound to break barriers.
Oh, that was wonderful. Yeah.
Felt very thematic for the one voice.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that.
So any just final thoughts about, if someone's into art, someone's into activism, how do they get started in kind of bridging that gap?
Yeah, the nice thing to me about poetry or drawing or painting is you can just start. It's like, and I think part of the hurdle is feeling like you have to be great at something. And whether or not, if we do reach greatness, is that the point? And, is it the expression? Is it the possibility of sharing your voice, as shaky as that voice might be, as poor grammar as you might think you have, but it's still your voice is valid, and it both for your own internal reflection, but also for sharing with the world. And so, I would recommend from a poetry standpoint, writing. You can be involved in all kinds of, you can go to groups, you can find open mics probably in your area, depending on where you're at, but still pretty good odds for most places. I can find them in my area, you can probably find them in yours. So you can go to open mics, you can go to where there's featured poets, or there's slams where they're in competition against each other. And the more you're exposed to that, the more it kind of resonates in my head, at least, of ooh, okay, I walk away often inspired. Even if maybe it's by a style I've never heard of. Patrick Roche, I mentioned earlier, I heard him on a video. You can also find these things just on video, even without leaving your house. I heard him do a type of poem on a video that I'd never heard before, but I loved it. And I was like, I've got to write something in this style. And I did. And I really like how that form of poetry works. It's very much like a puzzle form. So even with poetry, there's so much, you can do free verse, you can set it up into this is just however you want it to work. So just starting somewhere, as with anything, including in our movement to end factory farming, community is important. It's going to help inspire you. It's going to help keep you going. It's going to help build those connections around you. And so I think that's important in art too, that if for some people, maybe that's all you needed was that reflection and you were done, like a journaling. I mean, that's art to say, that's writing, and even if you're never sharing with anyone else. But for a lot of us, that community with the collective support is really empowering to keep us going, to keep us motivated, to keep us inspired.
Well, Keith, I'm glad you're part of our community.
Glad you are as well, Carrie.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's
Pleasure
fun.
talking with you. Yeah, as always.